Well, hello everyone. Welcome back for episode 3 of season 3 of Life on Side B. I didn't even mean for that to rhyme, but it does. And we are here with some of my favorite people, and I've been really looking forward to this episode for a long time. I was originally going to call this episode Evening with the Authors, and then was thinking Brunch with the Authors. Now, do we have mimosas? No.
I was about to say, I wish you would have told me because, you know, I love a good mimosa. I would have liked mimosa so fast.
I know, and I was thinking about it, and then I was like, I don't got orange juice in this house. I have wine, but, like, I could have gotten wine. Anyway, we're here with some of the greatest voices. Wesley Hill, Eve Tushnet, and David Bennett. Thank you all.
Yeah.
It's great to be here.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes.
Good to
Thank
see
you for
everyone
having
too.
us.
Yeah, this is going to be a great time, and Henry and I have been really looking forward to this. Henry is going to lead the conversation because while this is my first time, this is really my first time, I think, really not interacting. Wes, I met you at Revoice one year.
We met at Revoice. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, we did, but we had like a in the hallway kind of conversation.
Exactly. Very brief. Yeah.
Yeah, and even David, this is my first time really like talking to you, not on email or messenger. So because of that, Henry has met everyone in person before, so he's going to lead this conversation. And I'll be here to have fun along the way.
Oh, gosh. Yes. Well, if we're ready to go in,
So
oh my gosh. First of all, I want to tell listeners that I am still anti this having a video myself thing that Josh is making us do for this season. Because like I have to look somewhat presentable. And the whole point of a podcast is you don't have to be seen.
Oh wait, I saw the pictures of you on your new podcast. You were like killing it with the
that was in
the
studio
fashion.
and for press. Like I had to.
I'm just saying.
Literally, yeah, those at the park was in studio and then press and then in front of a live audience, so I had to get dressed. But other than that, I'm going to be in my bed for the rest of that podcast.
I know. I just thought it was so funny because in our first one, you're in your bed, and then I looked at it, and I was like, "Wait, what is Henry wearing in these episodes?"
When Josh released the trailer for this season, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I am literally in my bed, like recording a podcast." I was like, "Henry, this is so terrible." I was like, "Okay, so this one, I got out of my bed. I'm sitting at my kitchen island and drinking some tea and staying warm. So at least
Love
I'm
it.
a lot more visible."
All right, great. Well, yeah.
I wanted to jump in. For those of y'all listening, Eve, David, and Wesley are brilliant writers and speakers and theologians, and I just say just heroes of the faith of mine personally and then of so many other people. So it's an honor to have y'all here today with us on the podcast. And I have, like Josh said, I have met each of y'all. Eve and I have talked probably the least, but we've spoken. David and I had breakfast and a wonderful walk through Dallas, Texas. About
We
2
did. It was fabulous.
And Wesley and I knew each other for a couple of years, and then we had some cocktails. Summer 2019 at Revoice. Which I was
Exactly. Yeah. That was a great time.
So thank y'all for being here. I know it's time that you have set aside, so we really appreciate y'all just coming on and talk with us. So.
Yeah.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, well, I'll just dive right in.
Go, Henry.
Okay, so all of y'all are writers, as I mentioned. So can y'all tell us, when did you know that you were going to write a book, that you had something to add to this conversation, and what was that writing process like for you?
Eve, do you want to go first?
Yeah, let's start with Eve. Yeah.
Really?
I read her
thought-
book first, I think, so yeah.
All right. I had wanted to write a book for a while before I started. Well, and I did a bunch of beginnings to Gay and Catholic. And And I don't remember what my thinking was at the time. It probably was basically what ended up being the idea for the book, which was that there were memoirs out there, but not a lot that was specifically focused on what are the... Thank you, David.
Love that book.
For our listeners, David just showed a copy of Gay and Catholic across the screen.
Basically, the idea behind it was, what are the paths of love that are open to you in the church? So there was memoir basically to give credibility, or to say, for people who would be wondering why I cared or where I was coming from, here's where I'm coming from. But the bulk of the book would be exploring different pathways that people could take to give and receive love in the church. So I started it a bunch of times, and my current theory, is that it didn't work out because I needed to quit drinking first. There's a lot of stuff in Gay and Catholic about sort of alcoholism and sobriety, because I started drafting it probably right around the 3-month mark of my sobriety. And so it was still very vivid and fresh in my mind. And I think that I needed that level of clarity and integrity. If I tried to write it beforehand, there would have been too many things that I would have been hiding. And so it wouldn't have been able to really be honest. And I think on some level I knew that. So the drafting process, once I started, was actually super easy. I was living with my parents, as I am right now, actually. And I sort of spent the summer sitting on their back porch with a pint of Ben & Jerry's, doing a page a day until it was done.
Love that, and I love that you knew you had to. Your sobriety was going to lead into you being super authentic. I think that's important, because that is something that touches a lot of people's lives, and so yeah, that's important. So I'm going to put a pin in that. I want to come back to that if you don't mind later. So, yes, Wesley.
Yeah, so I came out, first to myself and then to other Christians in a setting that was...
Did you realize, wait, I just called you Wesley and not Dr. Hill because you were trying to get me to break that habit, and I finally did it. Oh my gosh.
Yay, good.
The African in me just panicked at that. I was like, Henry.
That's great. Love it.
The African in me was like, oh no, what if my mom heard that?
Most of my friends call me Wes, so you can even drop a syllable next time.
Yes, okay.
So I first came out in an environment that was pretty influenced by the whole ex-gay paradigm. So I felt a lot of pressure from Christians in my life to scrutinize my relationship with my dad and see if that was at the root of my same-sex attraction, all that whole paradigm. And I just never found it illuminating. It always felt that I was trying to kind of shoehorn my life into it in order for it to work. So I was kind of desperately looking for something to read. I didn't start out wanting to write a book. I started out wanting to read a book. I wanted to read a book about what it would be like to actually own, yes, I'm gay, and I'm not trying to fix that or change that. But at the same time, I'm not embracing same-sex marriage. I'm embracing a life of celibacy. And I was just desperate to find it. I thought I found it when I found some pages in a biography of Henry Nouwen, who was a Catholic priest, a celibate man, but he was not out to very many people in his life, and so it wasn't quite what I needed. I wanted someone to write about this experience, what it was like, and so that's kind of how it started. I felt well, if I want to read this book, I may actually have to try to write it myself. And so I drafted it when I was in my mid-20s. I was living in Africa at the time, in Cameroon, and just sort of sitting there at my computer for long hours, and it came to me later to kind of intersperse the stories of Nouwen and Gerard Manley Hopkins along with it, to kind of give a sense that this is not just me sharing my life, but there is actually this paradigm that has existed, in the history of the church. So yeah, that's kind of how it came about for me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And David, you are the third into this, so you threw your book into the game as well. So how was that for you? When did you know? Well, your story is just, I mean, you've got to be one of the most fascinating people I've ever met, and I don't use that lightly, but because I know a lot
Henry,
of people.
I find you equally as fascinating. I want to ask you, when are you writing your book?
Oh God, Wesley's read some of it actually, so it's in the works. Lord.
Look, I think, and we're going to talk about whiteness as well, which I'm looking forward to. I think that's something.
It's Black History Month after all.
Come on.
So okay.
Yeah, but I think my book was birthed out of the kind of fiery crucible of the charism of an evangelist. Like, I think for me it was, I am this fresh convert. I don't have the Christian baggage in the same way. I am gay, but I don't. Suddenly the progressivism that I was part of wasn't fitting me as a born-again Christian. And so I wanted to write a book which didn't go conservative, didn't go, like, just refuse that whole political spectrum. I suppose you could say queered it, but I, you know, but I don't think I had language like that yet. I don't think I was there. I was like, but I want to write this fresh story, and I feel like it has power in it for people of all kinds, but particularly LGBTQI plus people, to just try to find that deeper way. And there were books out there by like people who were Muslim and had become Christian, and I'd read those, and they'd really spoken to me. Persecuted Church, and they helped me to kind of craft, I suppose, A War of Loves. Wesley's book was massively pivotal for me too, as a book that inspired mine. And I think also Eve's like theology of Eros was super important for me, which we can talk about later. But yeah, I suppose it was so that a Christian who has no idea about being gay or the wrestle of and the gift of what we are as a community could enter into our story in one way, and that a person who is gay and atheist could understand Christians and why they make the choices they make in a more profound way. And I think that was like the kind of double-edged motivation for why I wrote the book.
I love that. David, I guess back to you too. So Wes and Eve both wrote their books before you wrote yours. Were you familiar with their works? And anyway, how did their work shape or inspire yours?
So I have memories of being in a Catholic school, raised in a Catholic school, doing like my Hail Marys. I wouldn't say that I was actually like Catholic. I definitely wasn't converted to Christ, but I have this kind of cultural memory of Roman Catholicism. And Eve's work came into my life. I actually hadn't read Gay and Catholic, but I read various articles of Eve's. And I think I detected within Protestantism a weakness around the theology of desire in Protestantism. And I think we still have that weakness. And we need a reformation, or at least a counter-reformation. I don't know. Maybe we need to listen to our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters more about the theology of desire. And also Eve's way of just being so comfortable in her skin related to being gay, I think was really helpful, because at a certain point, I suppose I would have the side Y temptation, where I was in the evangelical world and I was like, I just don't want to deal with this. I don't want to have to be the gay guy and put up as like this kind of complex character. And Eve's way of positioning herself, which was a bit different to Wes, really gave me the courage to just like say, no, I'm gay and I don't have to reject that history. So that's been really precious to me. So both those two things, and also a female voice. At the time, were like very few female voices, women voices, and that was really, really important to me as well. And then for Wes, I think Wes's book almost like providentially was given to me like by God. In my book, you can read about that. And I think I'd always kind of thrown up in my mouth a little bit at the idea of being celibate. You know, like I was like, right? You know, like my inner like gay activist that was like, I love Jesus, love the Trinity. I'm all right with the Bible. Church tradition can go out the door. You know, I was still kind of in that place. And then I read Wes's book, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like he's gone through like such a similar experience. Wow. And it just unlocked a kind of offering my body up as a living sacrifice, and unlocked this whole other more erotic side of being celibate. That then I could see a path of flourishing in that. And so for me, that was hugely pivotal in my journey, both of those strands, from Eve and from Wes.
Yeah, those books for me, specifically Getting Catholic, and then we've mentioned Wesley's book several times. We haven't mentioned the actual name of it. So this one is Washed and Waiting, his first book. And I remember where I was distinctly for both of those books when I finished them and I was reading them. Eve's, I read a lot of it in my car for some reason. Like, I'm not like while I was driving, obviously, but like on lunch breaks and stuff, I would read it in my car. And I grew up Anglican, and so I called myself Roman Catholic Light growing up. And so I was just I relate a lot to this. And so that was just, especially from a woman's perspective, like David mentioned too, sexuality is not something that I ever really like thought to look at through the lens of a woman's perspective. Because I'm like, okay, I'm gay, like, a man, clearly, so that's just kind of what I need to think through. But it was fascinating to read through it in that lens and still apply it to my faith. And then Wesley's book, I mean, oh my gosh, like, I could probably just cry even when we talk about the first time I read it. But it had been something I was, like, deeply longing for and searching for, and, like, a story that looked like mine. And in the intro of my book, that who knows if it'll ever see the light of day, I mentioned that, I was like, I was sitting here.
We will make sure it sees the light of day.
But, and I'm like, I'm looking for this story. Who can understand this experience? Who can put words to this? And then page after page, oh gosh, if I could show you all my copy, my first copy of that book, there's just write-ins all over it. And I remember thinking immediately to Wesley how incredibly, like, lonely probably writing that book must have been in a way, because it is such a personal narrative. And it's breathtaking. And I went through it with a pastor friend of mine, Garrett, and then our good friend Daniel Stark. Him and I went through the book together. Yes. And it was just like, oh man, this is the book that the church needs. And then your second book, which we'll talk about later, was even just like, gosh, I mean, all y'all, I'm just like, how am I supposed to write or do anything? And then David's book comes along, and this man is so bold and, like, literally, like, so fearless. And I'm just like, damn, I could probably not say some of those things. You were just like, okay, like 0 to 100 on the gas pedal. Like, if Wesley and Eve were like, okay, we're going to pace this conversation, we're going to take it, David's like, bam!
Move. I am coming through.
It's that evangelism gift that he has. Yeah.
Yeah. It's probably the convert zeal. Yeah.
Yeah. I would love to jump in there and say, or sorry, go ahead, Henry.
Oh no, I was going to move on, but yeah, keep talking about it.
No, I was just gonna say, yeah, like talking about where you were when you first like read these books or heard these books. It's so crazy to me because, like, you know, I've read Wesley's book. Eve, I've read part of your book. I still haven't finished it, and David, I've heard
that too, by the way. So just
I know, he did. I used to be a person that read 12 books a year. I'm lucky if I get through one now. So, so this is my life. You know, with Wes's book, I grew up through Exodus, which many people have been on the podcast have gone through. And I remember when it came onto the bookshelves of when Alan Chambers brought it onto the bookshelves of Exodus, and everyone who was in the more conservative side of Exodus, which happened to be my leaders, were like, you should never read this book. You will. It was worse than Side A theology. It was worse. And so
what is that anyway?
Yeah. And so the crazy part is that, you know, I had left my left my boyfriend. I had done all this, and I'd gone through, and I'd been celibate for multiple years before I ever picked up your book. And ironically, which Wes, sometime we need to have like a one-on-one conversation about this and all. What actually got me to read your book was a friend of mine gave me in the journal you had published, Still Washed and Waiting, like a journal article.
Yeah. Yes.
Which I think then became like you added into a later version of the book.
Washed and Still Waiting. Yeah, that became
Washed and Still Waiting. Yeah. Washed and Still Waiting. Of course. Thank you for clarification. but then I read that, and that really pushed me to read it. And, you know, with Eve, one thing I always, literally almost anytime I talk, I end up quoting you about the whole thing of we cannot have a vocation of no. Like, for me,
Oh, yes.
that's
the quote.
Yes. That is like the quote. And that has always impacted me in my life of like, no, like if I'm going to thrive, there needs to be yes. There needs to be an avenue of yes, you know. And David, I've been so excited to hear your story because I think, you know, both of us coming from like side A backgrounds has always been really cool to see like, oh, wow, like there are other people like this, you know?
Yeah.
And so...
We do.
Yeah, go ahead, Henry.
No, I was going to say, that's really interesting. You even mentioned you and David's story, because mine, theologically, I've never been anywhere but where Wesley and Eve were. So it's like, was never hard. Like, grasping that in itself, the theology side, was never hard. It was for me the practical, what does this look like lived outside, that I was just like, oh my gosh, where's a roadmap? And I would literally pray, where's a roadmap? And it's so funny, Daniel, who probably wouldn't mind if I told this story, but so his sister had given him the book years before, Wash and Waiting, and he said he had it in like the bottom of some drawer. He just did not ever want to touch it and whatnot. And so when he kind of came back to his faith and like he joined my small group, we were at the same church together at the time, and how we met was very crazy, but or very God ordained rather. But he was like, okay, so my sister has given me this book. I don't know if you've heard of it. I think it's probably time I dig it out and read it. And then he told me the book. I was like, oh, I'll read that with you. I was like, I've read it before. I'll read it through it again with you. And like we looped in our pastor. Yes. Like, let's all read this. And I was like, and Get Catholics next. We'll read that too. And he's like, okay, slow down. I'm like, I'll start running.
Yeah. Like one of the things I think, oh, sorry. Who was going to talk?
That's okay.
The one thing I was just going to say, and then I'll let it, because I'm more here to be in the background. But when I read Wes, when I read your book, one of the things that most impacted me about the book was when you retook the verse of Matthew where it says, anyone who has left their father, mother, all of this will be blessed tenfold. I'm probably like destroying the Bible in this moment, but like, and you added in there a gay partner. And for me, that was so impactful as someone who like has loved someone and was like, wow. And I think then, David, your book was such a great continuation of that, even though like and your story and bringing that story in there to be able to say like this community of Side B people is filled with both people who've been in the church and pursued celibacy for their lives, as well as people that come from other backgrounds that, you know, and like, yeah.
I think it's interesting, Josh, because for me now, what I'm doing in academia, a lot of it is like this extension of almost like, as an evangelist, apologist, I'm trying to kind of actually say to academia, like, hold it accountable too and say there should be a space for our voice, you know. And I wonder if that's a drive, maybe if you've been side A or you've been in those environments, you're kind of a little bit more invested in going back to that world and saying, hey, I'm like part of you still. Because I think you have that whole thing where you become a convert and you say, well, you know, I'm Christian now. And you get into this like dualism and you're like, oh, well, I'm side B and like you're all gone now and like I'm saved, you know.
Yeah.
And now I feel like there's just so much to talk about like reconstructing your relationship with the world you identified with in the past and still identify with now, and like what that looks like without falling into this dualism. And then I imagine it's the same being side B with the church. If you've grown up with the church, you have to do the same kind of reconstruction. So I found it really fascinating in a side B community where I'm like going through this kind of stuff, which is more related to the secular side A world, and trying to like speak to it in a Christian way that's understandable. And others are doing other things. I think that's just really fascinating, like the kind of way everyone tissues together in our community. And I think that's a gift from God that we're all like learning to value. So I just am really, I'm just so excited that we're kind of getting to that point, you know, and to be in any way a part of that process is just such an honor. Yeah.
I love that. And I love your positivity and your outlook on this journey. And excited in the side B conversation. It's probably not the word I'd put together in my head at this point in time, because it can feel so draining. And on that note, for really Wesley and Eve, I really want to thank y'all just for the road y'all have paved for us, and many of us who write and speak, just to come behind y'all. And y'all took some bullets for us. I mean, I have read reviews, y'all have read reviews, y'all have read the tweets or criticism after conferences and whatnot. And I'm just like, wow, I don't know how y'all handle that, but I really think the Lord used y'all to prepare a place for all of us who were coming behind y'all, following y'all's footsteps. And what is it like, one, to deal with the criticism, as ways y'all have for sure, and two, what is it like now, having written books before and seeing a new wave of authors like David, and we have Greg, and we have the Bridgets of the world and whatnot. So what is it like seeing some of those people come up behind y'all?
Wes, you were first, so you
Yeah.
go.
Well, so Washington Waiting came out in 2010. And it immediately got a lot of positive reviews. There was a really sweet and lovely review at First Things website. It got blogged about, and I got invited to speak in various churches and Christian colleges. And so I think having that kind of initial positive reception, it made me think like, wow, maybe we really have turned a corner, in the Christian world, and there's a new openness to celebrating the lives of gay and celibate believers. And honestly, I mean, so we're recording this in early 2021. The first Revoice conference happened in the summer of 2018, and I don't think I was prepared, and I think I'm still processing all of the negative backlash from conservative Protestants, particularly evangelicals. It took me off guard, and it made me sort of rethink. Like I'm not sure what happened with Washington Waiting, but I think there's less hospitality for folks like us than maybe I was prepared to think. So it's been over 2 years now since the first Revoice conference, and the subsequent conferences have gotten pushback as well. But I think it's left me with a feeling of like, I need to process this still. Like where are we in terms of the work that remains to be done? What are the criticisms that I need to take seriously and really hear? And how do I need to perhaps modify the way I talk about these things or advocate for these things? But I feel like I'm maybe a little more wounded than I was when Washington Waiting came out, and I have an awesome spiritual director who is also he's a professional therapist as well as an Anglican priest, and so I'm doing a lot of processing with him these days and trying to just take my own temperature as well as the temperature of the movement that I've helped go along. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
Thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
Eve, what would you say?
Okay. So let's see. Criticism, I should probably first say that I probably move in a different world than the world of criticism that Wes was seeing and talking about. There's a lot of cross-pollination in the US, at least, between Catholic and Protestant communities on gay stuff specifically, for good and for ill, right? I think Revoice is the good, and there's many examples of the ill. But what I see is mostly only when it comes out in the Catholic world. And Revoice was not targeted in the same way. So that was sort of, I was on one side to that. Criticism that I get tends to fall into three categories. One is just wrong, and that is easy to ignore. One is uncharitably expressed, but probably has some grain of truth, which always gets under my skin. This is actually like a very good, I've learned over the years, this is a very good tool for telling when criticism has something to say to me, is if it irritates me. If I find myself like ranting in my head about the wrongness of this person's statement, it is almost certainly partly correct.
Yes, I agree with that. That's good.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
And then the third one is actually not criticism at all, but praise that in some way makes it clear that I haven't expressed myself fully or well or in the right way. The big thing that happened with Gay and Catholic was that several people praising it, perceived it as setting up covenant friendships as kind of the solution to the problem of gay people. And that this was now the ideal model that the church could offer gay people as they offer marriage to straight people. And I don't know how successful I've ever been on pushing back on that, but it is, I think, like a misunderstanding that can do a lot of harm, both because it still frames things in the terms of gay people as a problem seeking a solution. It kind of limits covenant friendship to us when it is for everybody. And it also sets up, an alternative. We talk a lot in the side B community about the idolatry of marriage, and I think there is a temptation to set up an idolatry of the devoted, intimate, pledged, committed same-sex relationship, the celibate partnership, or the covenant friendship as an idol in a similar way, where if you don't achieve that, you failed. Because it's something people want so badly.
Yeah.
And so once you offer the possibility and the hope, which I think is real, right? I say it because I think it's real and true and in scripture, that you can have this life-shaping relationship, then you do set it up as something to be attained, as a mark of some kind of I don't know. It's the AA slogan: "Expectations are planned resentments." You're giving people a new expectation, which was always a true one.
Yeah.
But there's I don't know. I'm now rambling, but my basic point was that there were positive readings of Gay and Catholic that nonetheless kind of pointed out to me that it is easy for people to over-focus on the new shiny thing that I was saying about covenant friendship, and to make that the answer in a way that I don't think it should be. So that's kind of the criticism thing. I've always been sort of water off a duck's back when it comes to personal insults, probably because I get less of them. People talk about how if you're a woman on the internet, people will constantly be yelling horrible things at you, and essentially I'm like the only person I know who can say this hasn't been my experience. And then so the second part of the question, which I feel like maybe we should do separately, was more like how has the landscape changed?
Yeah. I was going to say on the criticism piece, before I ask David to answer that, and then we'll probably move to the landscape change. But it's, that was really good what you said about if somebody's criticism irritates me, there's probably a level of truth in it that I need to examine. I'm like, that is so true. I'm like, why am I so bothered by that unless something about it is true? So that's a good just gauge. But there comes a point to where even leading into Revoice and the first one and even the second one, I finally, and then as I navigate the evangelical culture and all the many thoughts that, one, I'm just like, so many people think they know what's best for your life better than you do. And in terms of this conversation, I'm like, nobody has thought about this more than us. It's like, this is something I'm actually living with. So please believe you me. Everything you think you've thought about this journey, I've thought about that 20, 40, 100 more times than you have.
Right.
And so I finally got to a point where I said, I am no longer going back and forth with people who are inherently committed to misunderstanding me, because some people really just don't understand, and some people are committed to misunderstanding you. And that's on both sides of the conversation. And I got to the point where with the Christians and evangelicals specifically, like if you're at a point to where you are deeply rooted in misunderstanding me, we're not having a conversation. Like I'll be charitable and like dismiss you, but it's like, no, it's not up for debate. It's like even using the word gay, I'm like, that's no longer a thing that I'm just like having a long dialogue with somebody about. Yeah. Like, use same-sex attraction if you want in your head. I don't care what you use, but like, as for me in my house, we are not debating you on the usage of that word. So,
yeah.
But yeah.
Well, and I think there's I want to sort of underline that, because I think there's a deep resistance, sometimes explicit, sometimes more implicit, among conservative straight Christians, to use a maybe unnecessarily objectifying term, to treating gay people as in any way an authority on our own experience or on scripture or on the life of the church. There's a deep resistance to saying that we have anything to offer that they do not have better. And I think that's to some extent rooted in the definition of homosexuality as a psychiatric disorder. That like we have a distorted perception of a reality, so why would you trust us about that reality itself?
Yeah.
That's my sort of armchair diagnosis of that. But I think that it's some of what Henry's saying is coming from that unwillingness to admit that they do not actually know more about our lives, or that's not they, right? It's often pointing to other different straight people and saying, listen to these people instead of them, instead of the gay people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on that criticism and just everything? And yeah,
I think I remember going to Evangelical Theological Society for like the first time because Zondervan gives you like this free ticket, you know, because you're now an author, so you get like something extra just to go. And I was like, I didn't really know what Evangelical Theological Society was. It's like this kind of other thing before the big American Academy of Religion meeting. And I remember walking into this like, you know, meeting with like Preston Sprinkle, some other white man, Denny Burke, etc. And just being like, why are they talking about us? Like, why is there not like a panel of actually gay evangelical or traditional Orthodox people? Like, this is crazy. Like, like at least one of us, please. Like, you know, and like you can even curate someone that like you agree with more and makes it more comfortable for the conference. I don't even know. And then Preston like came down from like speaking at that panel discussion and just said, David, I'm so sorry that I didn't want to be chosen for that, you know, and I just felt so loved by Preston in that. And so I feel like that just is like one example of like the madness of the church's absolute. I think what we do is we remind the church of Jesus, and the church wants to shut down because Jesus has included us and given us power to live a holy life. And the church has always been, you know, ever since Paul was preaching, you know, wants to reject the included by the Holy Spirit. And so I feel like there's a very deep, like, problem with people who get power in the church and don't understand the Holy Spirit. That's why I've always struggled with kind of structures and institutions. But then there's a flip side of that in the Side B community where we really struggle with authority as well and how to relate to authority. And so I feel like this is a whole morass of things that I have not, you know, solved, or I don't have all the answers for, but I just think what's going on is just the landscape really needs brave, strong voices. And that's why I decided to write my book at this young age, not because I wanted to write a book. And I remember sitting with wise people, you know, who say, you know, you should wait till you write the book. But God was just insistent as well. And so I think there needs to be like a bravery from us, but there has to be a repentance from the church too, and us like receiving that repentance and not being hard-hearted. And then also, as Eva so wonderfully expressed, receiving loving criticism, you know, of how to steward our particular vocations from outside ourselves is also something I think we need to master. But it's very difficult when you go to these conferences in the more traditional evangelical Catholic, I don't know, like Catholic world, and the people aren't even gay or queer or same-sex attracted or transgender or whatever speaking. And I think that has to change, and I think we're part of that change. And I think it has changed. What I feel very happy about, just quickly, I suppose, is what I call the practice of solidarity with Side A people. I think I really struggled with that at the beginning. Was like, how do I have solidarity with other gay people without like compromising my conviction? And I feel like, you know, I had that debate with Brandon, or conversation. I think it was conversation, but they called it a debate. A conversation with Brandon Robertson, where I actually practiced that. I built a solidarity with him as a progressive gay pastor, and we were able to talk about issues and open up questions that like haven't been opened up in like big programs before. And I think that's a really exciting development and change in the landscape. I still think that existed to some degree, but it's maybe like, you know, there was like the Gay Christian Network, and there was like Side A and Side B people in solidarity. So I'm not saying that that's new, but I feel like maybe it's grown in confidence. I don't know, Wes or Eve, if you want to comment on the change, because you have been around longer than me. But yeah, I'm encouraged by that solidarity, and how I think we need to think about that solidarity more. How do we represent that without losing our conviction, and hold those two together?
Yeah. And I think Bridget does that really well, which kind of moves me into my, because I watch her do it, move in these spaces. I'm just like, okay, girl, you were solid. Okay, you went solid steps with these folks. But yeah, what do y'all think about the Davids, the Gregs, the Bridgets, and yeah, just other crops of writers who were coming up in this world that I think y'all kind of helped hold and create a safe place for us. And so yeah.
I mean, I mostly just think it's awesome. I think we need more and more and more voices. And I find myself thinking, so I have a family life. I share a home with a married couple and their two children who are my godchildren, and the oldest is four. The oldest is 4 now. And I just think about, who knows if they'll be same-sex attracted or not, or some sort of gender minority, whatever. But I just think, wow, they're going to grow up in a very different world than I grew up in, and there are going to be so many more resources for them. I felt like I was having to kind of construct it all for myself. Like I didn't know there were instances, examples of what love could look like, for someone like me. And now I just think we have a whole stack of books. We have a whole library of podcasts and conferences. It's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically my biggest feeling as well. I think everybody's contributing stuff, and everyone who puts their oar in, is moving the boat forward. That's probably not the necessary metaphor, but yeah, and I think that there is a greater speed in moving from obedience and sort of coming to terms with the truth about one's orientation and attractions to now how do I live in a way that's loving. I think my impression is that the authors that are coming out nowadays move through that path a little faster than I did and that Wes did, I think. And that's immensely encouraging. Like Greg Coles' book, Single Gay Christian, is mostly memoir, but he has more resources available to him for imagining a future and finding that grounded in scripture. And that's immensely encouraging to me. And I think what David was talking about, I may be getting ahead of the conversation a little bit, but what he was talking about with there's a previous model where, I shouldn't say previous, there's one model of Christian conversion where it's a rejection or like a break with your former life and your former communities, and another where it's like a flourish or a fulfillment of those former communities and commitments. And one thing that was really striking to me about David's book was that it seemed to come more naturally to him to view his life in Christ as a fulfillment of his life in gay communities, rather than a turning away from it. I don't know if that's true in terms of how it felt to him to live it out, but in terms of the way the book comes across, there's an ease with that perspective that I really appreciated, and like I said, and well, like he said, a desire for solidarity and service, and kind of continuing to make sacrifices for those communities.
David?
Oh, I mean, I just it's always like I can just feel the Holy Spirit, as we're talking about this. I mean, I almost well up with tears. I really feel just the pain of like the gay community and what it's been through with this. And I feel like it's one of the things that we have to do, I think, as side B people is realize the way that things we talk about have been used to hurt the gay community. And if we're not incredibly, and I think maybe this is where some of my zeal I had to reconstitute and rechannel, in the way that I have articulated these things, and be more sensitive to how, like, celibacy, for instance, has been used to clobber people or hurt them, and how it has been a suppression practice, to put it in the language of certain recent laws. And, like, that is to actually mourn that and to hold that in solidarity with the gay community, I think is something that we're going to enter into more as this conversation thickens. I think I just feel like Eve, your voice, it's like a church mother, like, to me. And it's just healing. It's just healing to hear your voice, like, in person. So thank you. And also Wes, obviously, and all of you guys. But I can just feel that, of how we're going to be part of healing the way that the Christian ethic has been misappropriated, used by power to hurt the gay community, and to try to bring this new horizon, this new way, this third, I don't even know if I like to call it deeper, but, whatever you want to call it, together we're doing that. And I think that's an incredibly exciting journey to encourage us. But what Eve was saying about the model of conversion and the theology behind what we're saying, I think is really important. And I was very grateful for the theology conferences before Revoice that helped to theologically frame what we're doing. Because I think we can easily get off track if we don't hold to a solidarity amongst ourselves, but also a theological depth that can hold us through to that goal of reaching the gay community and expressing an ethic of celibacy that's true to Christianity and not some like stoical repression or that hurts people.
Yes. Yeah. And speaking of voices, David, when your voice came in this conversation, like I mentioned, you came in like a wrecking ball that Miley Cyrus was on, and I am just like,
I'm like seeing myself on a wrecking ball as you say that, and I'm like, health and safety, goodbye.
Someone needs to create this meme.
When I think of David Bennett, I literally think of you on that Miley Cyrus. I came in like a wreck. I mean, you just did. Now it's like, oh, this is my first conversation with you. I don't even know. I think I reached out to you on Facebook or something. I saw you were going to be in Dallas on a book tour, a part of your book tour. I was like, I'm just going to reach out to him and see if he wants to grab breakfast. And then I brought my dear pastor friend and brother along, Garrett, and my friend Joel came with, and we were walking around Dallas. And it is rare that Henry Buto is at a loss for words or speechless or... And I was like, I'm just going to listen because I'm so fascinated by anything and everything coming out of this guy's mouth. And I remember even after Garrett and I, we were talking, and we were just like, okay, that was a conversation we don't get to have very often. And like, he was giving some criticism about DTS, the seminary here, criticism about mind you, this was 2018, and we thought stuff with the government, this one had gotten bad. We had no idea how bad it would get. But so David's giving us his thoughts. He's giving his thoughts on the church. He's giving his thoughts on this. And I'm like, I just met you 20 minutes ago, and you are so bold in how you speak. So thank you for that gift of your personality. But where does that come from?
I think it's a mixture of Greek genes. And I think I come from a family culture of honesty, and my parents were always very strong on like, just say what you think, and be who you really are, and don't, I didn't have the kind of repressive Christian parents so I think when I came into the conversation, that was part of it. The other part is just this sense of kind of passion to see things change, and passion to go into environments that were more conservative as someone who agreed with those theologies on some level, maybe not completely, but like Jesus is raised from the dead, like creeds are true, like, the Bible is the authoritative word of God on, however you want to parse that. And let's just go, like, let's see change, like, let's hear voices, let's be that wrecking ball. But I think like Wes, I think Wes and I came at a crossing point together. I think about 2 years ago in London.
I'm trying to remember. Yeah, maybe even longer, actually.
Yeah, and we were also having a cocktail.
Yes.
Small dogs and cocktails. And I was saying to him, because he said to me, well, I'm really glad to see you're kind of doing this vocationally and whatever, but it's hard. There's like a toll. And I suppose at that point I'd started to feel that toll of like, I was the wrecking ball. And I think God used that. But really am passionate about other side B voices not having to go through the pain and anguish and tax that we maybe,
Yes.
and probably even Wes have more than I have. But, you know, how do we create vocations in ministry or just life generally that are actually sustainable for us and that don't mean we're constantly falling over into pain and woundedness and like, you know, yeah, like I wanted to see, I suppose I was passionate about joy. I want to see like the joy of the side B gay community or just, you know, those who have been saved by Christ and just constantly feeling like we were pushed under. And I think that joy was supernatural for me that I got from the Holy Spirit. The joy of just giving yourself to God is incredibly effusive and just, yeah, it comes, you know, enthusiasm to be filled with God.
Yeah.
I think that enthusiasm was a gift, but also something that I had to mature in.
David, keeping it on you for a second. To be friends with you in real life, like I consider you a friend of mine, it is an honor. And then to be friends with you on social media is a spectacle, a delight. Like whenever I see a long post from you, I truly go make sure I find my phone charger, like or my laptop. And my friend Garrett, who I keep mentioning, a dear pastor friend of mine, would like text like, "Did you see this? Screenshot this? Like, did you read this yet?" And I'm just like, "Oh God, what did David do? What did he say?" And they end up usually being great mini sermons, but I'm just like, what are these conversations you aim to spark with these posts? And specifically, even last week, with the court decision you had mentioned, and you had a lengthy post. Honestly, I don't interact with Facebook much because, like, Facebook is what it is. But whenever I see the comment section, when, like, yours the other day said 125 comments, I am like, oh yeah, let me go right in here and just get this tea.
Go right for the comments.
Yes, I just love lurking and reading in there. I'm just like, and then also, so there's a phrase Black people use, like when somebody has the time. I'm like, oh, David Bennett he woke up today and he had the time.
What are doctorates for? No, I'm joking.
Exactly.
What are the conversations you aim to spark? Because, like, I can tell you're not doing it to be like antagonize people, whatever. But it is like you have a purpose with the way you challenge people, and so is that
I think. I mean, I'd love to hear what Eve and Wesley have to say about how do you steward your voice. For me, I think it just comes to a point where I get so unable to not say something. When I think about, especially the Victoria Bill, for instance, like, and it's been very helpful to hear like Josh's experience with Exodus or other people. I don't have those experiences. I'm in this space where I'm like, oh no, the secular culture is doing the thing that the fundamentalist Christian culture did. Like, I have to post about this. I have to say this is not okay. Like, you know, and like pull out that part of it that so needs to be articulated. And maybe I don't do it perfectly because I'm kind of in it, but I feel that it's important to say that. Otherwise, it doesn't get heard. And there have been many instances throughout my ministry where I've been like, I'm too exhausted to say that. I'm too tired to like write another article. But every time I have, like, someone messages me and says, thank God you said that because I desperately needed that today and that's helped me on my next step. And I think the Spirit sometimes uses that. And I have to admit, sometimes I think it's also a fleshly thing where I need to resist and not be a wrecking ball. And it's not my call. So it's not all like the Holy Spirit is using me. But I think that boldness he's given me, he does use to bring out those issues for people. And I hope that, you know, if you ever feel like, David, you need to maybe pull it back a bit, I'm very happy for a message as well. But like, what other space do we have to process this? I don't know. Like, I think the gay community's always been an online community that is very open about its conversations. And so I suppose I've modeled myself a bit on that too.
I think that's really interesting you mentioned about the online community and these conversations that we're having, because as a Black man, specifically in the past year, well, I've been Black my whole life, but specifically in the past year and a half in this country. But A lot of conversations that were probably had in other spaces are now being had online, and it's something I mentioned in the season opener of the season. But I see probably a lot of the conversations that should be happening in churches and whatnot now happening online just because of the church's reluctance or refusal to have some of these conversations. And that can get very disheartening. And I can kind of be like you in both the race conversation or the gay conversation, sexuality, whatever you want to call it. And I can kind of come in like a wrecking ball. And then I got to a point to where I felt like this was probably, just fatigued on both ends. Certainly happened in 2019. And then this past year, I was like, you know what, Henry, you probably need to take a break because too much of your flesh is starting to come out in this conversation, not enough of the spirit. And so I took a break from speaking, from writing about it, and really having conversations on platforms. And even now people will message me or something, and I'll be like, nope, here's a link. Here's someone else you can talk to. Here's this. Like, I've had to learn to, like, really conserve where I interact in those conversations, especially online, because a lot of it for me online is like, I'm talking to strangers, and so many people want to really come at you, and I'm like, we're not going to do this. And so what are y'all's thoughts on that in terms of, like, knowing when to come in with, like, a boldness and when maybe to take a step back, and how do y'all take a step back and recharge?
Well, I think that's one reason I am excited about things like Revoice is, for me, being with other queer, gay, SSA folks is increasingly it feels necessary for my spiritual life and my relational well-being, where you don't have to offer many explanations or defenses of what you're going through, and you can count on people to get it, people to understand and sympathize. That's why I'm so excited about kind of defending Revoice and like seeing it be all that it can be. Just because it feels personally necessary. It feels important for me, not just as a movement, but just as a space to be. I also think, kind of returning to Eve's question about criticism, I remember someone giving me advice years ago saying, you need to know who are the one or two people in your life that you can go to and say, this is what I wrote, and this is the pushback that it's gotten. What am I not seeing here? Do I need to take this seriously? And if those people tell you, hey, there is probably something here that you need to consider and reflect on, then by all means, take it seriously and do that work. But if that person who knows you well and knows your strengths and weaknesses says to you, this is really not a good faith criticism, kind of trusting those people to know you and have your back in that sense, that's been helpful for me. Just having that kind of handful of folks who I know, these are my people. These are the people whose voices I trust to speak into my life. As far as boldness goes and kind of when to intervene in a conversation, I've always kind of used a diagnostic for myself of what do I feel that I have to say? Like, what is kind of burning like a fire in my bones, to quote the Jeremiah line. So with Washed and Waiting, I just felt like I have to do this. This feels necessary. I don't see this book existing in the world, and I'm not sure I'll publish it, but I just feel like I have to write it, even if only for myself. And the friendship book, the book called Spiritual Friendship, was similar. I felt that kind of on the heels of some of the things I was reading and learning from Eve, her blog, her book, I think had just come out. I felt that this conversation also needs to be happening in the evangelical Protestant world. And for people who might not pick up a book like Gay and Catholic, maybe my friendship book can be something that draws on what I've learned from Eve and kind of presents this idea that we're not simply called to give something up if we're gay and Christian. We're not simply called to a renunciation. We're called to embrace something positive and to pursue something that is about giving and receiving love. So, and I'm, right now I'm working on a project. It's taken me a long time to get any traction on it, but along the lines that David was talking about of side A, side B, solidarity, I'm working on a project about what would it look like if we not tried to solve our debate with each other or convert each other necessarily, but what if we reframed the terms of the conversation so that it's about what are the forms of reordering desire that we all should be looking to explore. So, some of the very best side A arguments I've come across from people like Eugene Rogers or Sarah Coakley. It's not about simply the indulgence of desire. It's not about like giving gay people like an outlet for their passions or something. It's much more about like what does discipleship look like? What does the sanctification of desire look like? What does the reordering of one's loves look like? And I think that's the conversation that we in the side B world can be having too. So there's a lot of solidarity and there's a lot of mutual exploration we could do, even if we don't quite end up with the same conclusions. So yes. I don't see many people writing about that right now. So I think this is one of those. It's another one of those things that feels important for me, and therefore I take that as a sign I need to be writing about it. And I think David, you and I are in pretty similar theological territory these days. So I'm hoping in the next few years there's going to be a lot of iron sharpening iron as we together dialogue about these things too.
Definitely.
Do I sense a collab happen? No, I'm joking.
Maybe.
Ready? Put the hands in the center.
Wesley, we don't have time to get into this, but for those of y'all listening, Wesley just said something really important that I have wanted to express and have expressed at various times about the side B world, culture, whatever. The lack of discipleship can be really glaring sometimes and painfully obvious or aware when I read some things. I'm like, oh my God, these babies need to be discipled, honey. But myself included sometimes. But I'm just like, well, myself included all the time. We all need to be discipled. But like there is a gap in discipleship in parts of this conversation. And so I definitely wanted to flag that. And maybe that's something we can talk about at a later date if we have you back on the podcast.
Yeah, I'd love to.
But yeah, I want to move to Eve. Real quick, the conversation we are having currently, and then with the five of us, and then the one we are having in the largest side B conversation, or just sexuality, is largely dominated by men, specifically white men. So, what are your thoughts on the lack of women's visibility? My friend Kaylee, who's a therapist, she always says this. She says, lack of visibility communicates lack of value. And what do you think about that in terms of there's not being as big of a space for women, similar like you, to engage in this conversation in meaningful ways? And in what ways do you think men could always take a backseat to anything at this point in time, honestly. But yeah, so what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this, knowing that we were going to have this conversation, and I still don't know that I've come up with anything super interesting, I'm afraid. I think that in general, women who try to write theologically realize at some point that our formation in the church has been weirdly way too dominated by men's voices, by theology, by men. And so you start constructing an alternative spiritual lineage that would include like Gertrude the Great alongside or instead of Aquinas, or that would be drawing more on women's models. Ultimately, my understanding from the polling is that there are just fewer lesbians than there are gay men.
Yeah.
And so and my own experiences in gay communities have been, and sort of gay culture has been mostly formed by men. And so I'm like weirdly comfortable with that. And maybe I'm therefore not the right person to have any insight into what is needed in the conversations from women who are not particularly excited to be in a gay culture, even a side B culture that's very, very much formed by gay men. I guess the only thing that I can really say with confidence is that there are women's intellectual lineages and lineages of women's witness that are there to be discovered. And I think that people will begin bringing those more into the conversation. They're harder to find for a lot of reasons. A lot of things that women did were not recorded in the historical record. And so if a lot of what you're looking for is to construct an intellectual lineage and a history, you are going to have a harder time. But they're there. Yeah. I think that's sort of all I can do.
Yeah. Wesley and David, what do y'all think about that? And in terms of, as white men, what do you think y'all's responsibility is to create space, decenter yourself, step down, and allow other voices, women, and then voices of color as well into this conversation and make room for that?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to say probably is that I'm in process on all of this, and I think for many people who've had the upbringing that I've had and the education that I've had, like we're currently in a huge learning mode. And I'm listening carefully to the conversations that are taking place right now around race in Christian churches and communities, and I think one of the things sorry, I keep going back to Revoice, but one of the things that I'm encouraged by with Revoice is these issues of diversity and representation are very much on their radar, and they recognize that.
We have to put that right to task. Believe you me.
Yeah, exactly.
And
you've been at the heart of that, Henry, which I think has been really beautiful to see. Like the statement that came out, that I think you were probably involved with was really encouraging. For sure. I will say, I think, like a lot of evangelical Protestants, when I was working on Watched and Waiting, I thought of this very much in kind of like individualistic terms, like my own spiritual journey with God as a gay man. And I think as I've listened to the conversations taking place around race, I've realized like that is at best one part of what we need to be talking about. There's also the larger patterns and structures of how the church functions that need to be re-examined, and we people like us, we not only need to cultivate a prayer life and a life of loving Scripture, etc., but we also need to be lending our voices prophetically to challenge structures that are unjust and patterns that should not exist in the church. So yeah, like you say, part of that is us simply stepping aside and using our platform to platform other voices. And I think part of it is maybe even in our own speaking. What would it look like for me, for example, when I get asked for the 25th time if I'll write something about my use of the word gay? What would it look like if I said, I won't write about that, but here's something I will write about. I'll write about diversity and representation in the Side B community. I don't know. That's just an idea for how I could perhaps use the voice that I've been given to prophetically change the subject sometimes.
Yeah, I'll jump in there with Wes. I think fantastic reflections. As a Pentecostal, I feel this kind of connection in the spirit with the Black community. I actually find myself unable to listen to worship music that is just constantly white. I have this deep grief in my heart about the church, not valuing Black Pentecostal worship or gospel music, and not just making that a gimmick. Actually, I think that needs to become the center of the diet of the church, is those who have been oppressed in history, their voices, their music, their culture becoming the center of the heart of the church in its cultural expression too. So for me, that's been really, I found myself especially over Black Lives Matter, just not being able to just done for a moment with all the white worship people or white pastors and just tuning them out for a moment and being I am going to listen to African voices and let that come into me in the spirit, because we're connected as one. And so I'm not Black, but I feel connected to Black people, and without that I am not whole. I think whiteness is a lack of being whole, in the sense of without the Black community, the church is just not whole. And there's just incredible revelation, there's incredible, I think of the history of the Pentecostal church with white and Black in the same room and the Spirit falling. There's just incredible stuff to be brought out there. So I would want to point there. And then I'd also want to say at Oxford, there's quite exciting developments finally in quite a stuffy British environment, seeing that there is Reformation happening, and we're going to have some more Black theology in the syllabus. And so I think things are changing, and I'm really excited about that. For the women question, I would say basically most of the systematic theology that I read now is women. So Sarah Coakley's systematic theology, Catherine Sonderegger's systematic theology. But I want to definitely see more Black voices in the systematic theology conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to how liberation theology and other like academic disciplines will come together to like refresh systematic theology.
Yeah.
And I think Wes and I are kind of part of that destabilizing of the kind of power structures that have stopped that. And so I'm excited to see what will happen. That's very academic, but that is also happening in the academic world.
So let me throw something in that I think is extremely practically relevant, which is that a lot of our conversations around celibacy and vocation often do not build in the role of economics and kind of how are you going to make this economically viable in a way that I assume disproportionately affects Black people, people of color, but is sort of also clearly its own thing. And that I don't know what more to say about it other than that I really wish we had more writing and discussion on that topic, because in reality people are just trying to like figure out how can I not be trying to live as a single person with no one to share my burdens, including financial burdens, and how can I in some way find a community that I fit into and can live and work in.
Yes.
At a queer calling. This is, I think, the only thing I've seen that was written explicitly about celibacy and socioeconomics was a post at a queer calling by Sarah, who wrote about the ways in which partnered celibacy for her was like made a lot more sense because of her background in the working class, and also was like much more economically viable than like just living on your own.
Yes, girl, let me tell you, because I say the Lord did not mean for me to pay this rent alone. I promise you, the Lord did not have that in mind for me. Not this car payment, not these utilities. I like fully believe it.
Preach.
Yes, but yeah, as we wrap up here, just one last question. I guess what's next? What are y'all working on? Because Eve, this summer, you had that article come out, and all my friends like were sending it to me, and like my best friend and his wife did. I'm like, I know her, I know this. Y'all are new to this, not me. I was like, this
Which
is
article
my
was
friend.
that?
Gosh, it
Was
was.
this the Pope Francis one?
Yes. And
yeah.
like, oh yeah, that one got sent everywhere. And I'm like, y'all, this is my friend. I know her. Like, this is good work. I felt like such a proud friend. I was like,
That's great.
yeah, so what are y'all working on individually?
Yeah, I'll start. I have a book coming out this fall that is a sequel to Gay and Catholic. It
Yes.
is, and it gets at some of the stuff that I think that I have learned since writing Gay and Catholic. There are two things that I would say. One is that Gay and Catholic was very much about the horizontal relationships that you could have with other people. This book is about directly your relationship with God and the things that Christians have done that have damaged that, and how you can rebuild and restore that. The title is going to be Tenderness, a Gay Christian Guide to Unlearning Rejection and Experiencing God's Extravagant Love, which sort of gives you a picture. And it's also about some of my own repentance for the ways that I engaged in these conversations before I was really deeply embedded in a gay Christian community, when I was kind of out there on my own. So that's my big thing. That's what I'm working on.
Okay. That is, like, do you know when in the fall it's coming out? That sounds
Late
like
fall.
something I can't wait to get my hands on.
Late fall. My guess is November, December.
Okay, just right in time for the holidays. Yes.
We will
That's
have
right.
to have you on later on after it comes out to talk about it.
Okay. Mr. Bennett.
For me, potentially a move back to New Zealand, not back to New Zealand. I suppose I'm Australian, but there is a theology college there that is potentially going to form a role for me. It's not set in stone. It may not happen, so that could happen. My thesis really, it's called Queering the Queer. How does homosexual celibate ascesis renew and inform the role of desire in contemporary Anglican theology?
Gosh, I got so tired just hearing that title. Y'all are so smart.
It is. I mean, it's Oxford. You have to do these kinds of things, and it's like form of academic sass. But yeah, so that's what I'm up to. I just really, honestly want to like be at Revoice. I have not been at Revoice. I feel like that's a project, but with COVID-19 in the way, let's like, yeah. But I think that they're the main things I'm up to. And yeah, God has been faithful to get me through them and in this time. So it's
Yeah.
good.
Dr.
Well,
Hill?
and I alluded to it earlier, but I've been working now for several years. It's not finished on a book that I'm co-authoring with Steve Holmes, who's a theologian at the University of St Andrews in Scotland. And Steve wrote a blog post. You can Google it if it intrigues you, called "Queer Hippo." The hippo comes from Saint Augustine of Hippo. And the queer is obvious enough. But Steve cheekily describes this post as being about how St. Augustine meets Judith Butler, and they get along surprisingly well. So the idea of the book is that we're kind of stuck in some corners of the church in a conversation between a view that would say gay is normal and good and natural, and therefore it needs to be affirmed. And then the sort of mirror image of that, heterosexuality is normal and natural and good, and therefore it needs to be defended and affirmed. And we want to try to say, what if that way of framing the question is wrongly, what if that's wrongly framed? What if it's not about looking for what's normal and then sort of baptizing it, but what if it's about the finding everything that exists now, including very much heterosexuality, to be in need of transformation, to be in need of redemption and in a sense reordering, which is the Augustinian vision, right? And someone like Judith Butler would say, there is no such thing as a normal instantiation of gender and sexuality, and so there's a surprise.
And Augustine would know.
Yeah, exactly. So there's like this surprising convergence, at least at some level, between kind of really adventurous secular queer theory and what St. Augustine knew all along, about the wayward heart and the way our loves need to be drawn back to their source in God. So that's the idea. It's proving a challenging book to write. I think I've been so distracted by what's happened with Revoice and also just our culture has changed so much in the last few years around these issues. Like when I started writing, Obergefell would not even have been thought of, and so I think I'm just trying to get my head around like where are we right now? Like what do I specifically have to say? And what am I being called to say? So pray for me, please.
Well, we'll do.
I think just quickly, like Augustine really is, I think, going to be an important. Like my first chapter's on Augustine, and I think that's going to be a hugely important theological resource for us because Augustine really is about a traumatized Christian culture trying to piece itself back together, and that's where we're kind of at, I think. So I mean, I cannot wait, Wes, for this book to come out. So, and to dialogue with you, it's going to be great.
Oh, so good.
Gosh, thank y'all so much, Eve, David, and Wes, for just coming on, giving us almost 2 hours of your morning and just chatting with us. This was a treat and honor for us as a co-host team, and then myself personally as just friends and admirers and people I consider heroes of mine. Thank y'all so much for just chatting with me this morning. So this was great.
Thank
you,
It's
Henry.
a pleasure.
Thank you, Josh.
Great.
Yes,
Much love.
Yeah.
I'm excited for the projects that are coming out, so I'm very excited.